GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, this is To The Point.
On GB News. Coming up, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, controversy over the coronation guest list.
Are your kids at home today because the teachers are on strike? Get in touch with us, let us know how you feel about that.
And it's the race against the clock to get people out of
Sudan, that's right. The evacuation is continuing. We're going to bring you all the latest in just a moment. Good morning, welcome to The Point. With Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner. Teacher strikes again today, but do they run the risk of being marked down and walking out? We're going to have all of this after your news.
Thank you, Bev. Good morning. It is 9:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. British forces are racing to evacuate as many people out of Sudan as possible before a ceasefire ends. 536 individuals with British passports have so far been flown to safety on 6 separate flights. The Foreign Secretary's warned he can't guarantee how many more will depart after tonight's deadline. Former Brigadier Paul Gibson says there's a huge risk to evacuating without a ceasefire in place.
There's now a huge risk about getting people from Khartoum out to the airfield, and that is a great concern. And I understand fully why the early advice was to stay put, and I think you'll now see huge diplomatic pressure from the Americans particularly to try and extend this ceasefire, because without a ceasefire in place, moving people out is going to be very difficult.
Schools in England are facing disruption as tens of thousands of teachers belonging to the National Education Union have walked out over pay. However, Year 11 and Year 13 classes are expected to be prioritised, with exams just weeks away. More strikes have also been announced for the summer term after union members rejected the government's pay offer. Today, the High Court will hear a legal challenge brought by the government against a planned nurses' strike this weekend. They're set to walk out for 48 hours from Sunday in their ongoing dispute over pay. But Health Secretary Steve Barclay claims the Royal College of Nursing's mandate for industrial action actually runs out on the 1st of May. The government's preparing to unveil the biggest shake-up of gambling in 15 years. The White Paper will help redress the power imbalance between punters and operators. It also aims to ensure legislation is fit for the digital age following an explosion in online betting. And a waxwork of the Queen Consort has been unveiled at Madame Tussauds in London ahead of the coronation. The figure is styled in a dark blue gown next to King Charles in the throne room. The museum says it marks a new chapter in the British monarchy. TV online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it's back to Bev and Andrew.
Well, it's a nightmare if you're a parent, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tens of thousands of teachers in England are walking out today after members of the National Education Union rejected the government's pay offer, which they said is insulting. It's £1,000 one-off payment and 4.3% next year.
That's right. All the major teaching unions have now rejected the 4.3% wage rise, warning that the disruption will get worse unless a deal is reached.
So half of England's schools were closed during last month's industrial action. So just how bad is the situation going to be before it gets resolved?
Let's go now to our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Anna Riley. Good morning, Anna. So many parents are frustrated this morning. Our kids have missed an enormous amount of school over the last few years. It's the last thing we need, and it looks like there's no sign of reaching a resolution.
Good morning, Bev. Yes, I'm here at Driffield School in East Yorkshire. It's a secondary school and a sixth form, over 1,000 pupils here, but the school has been closed other than to the years 11 to 13, so they can come in and do some exam preparations. Now, I spoke to Steve Scott earlier. He disagreed with you, Bev. He said actually that he feels that parents are behind the strikes, and this is what he had to say.
Attendance levels in schools are falling because we don't now have as many support staff that are able to deal with the pupils with the most need. So those pupils that would have had the support now simply don't have it because there isn't the funding in schools to replace those staff when they leave. So I think actually this strike action, when it leads to a fully funded pay offer from the government, will probably increase student attendance at school because we'll have the support in place for those pupils that need it.
And that question there as well, I asked him, you know, with the dropping attendance levels, will these strikes by teachers decrease the amount of pupils that are coming into school? But he said, no, pay us more, the teachers will come in, it'll be better funded and schools will run better. So that's the view from this picket line here in Driffield. And obviously we know more strikes planned on Tuesday.
OK, thank you, Anna. Anna Riley there in Yorkshire. OK, over 500 British nationals have been evacuated from Sudan as the military races against time to bring people to safety.
Yeah, the first flights arrived back in the UK from Larnaca yesterday. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, warns there's no guarantee, however, more flights will leave Sudan once that ceasefire, which is pretty shaky anyway, ends. It's due to end at 11 p.m. tonight.
Well, joining us now is our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, with the latest. And,
of course, we are also going to be talking about the coronation guest list, which has got very controversial. Mark White is here. Mark,
hot-footing it in here, Mark. He's the hardest working man in this building, I tell you. He never stops. He's got the latest from Sudan. What is the latest?
Well, in terms of the numbers, we know that just over 500 have been brought out so far, with more flights racing really to get in before this ceasefire ends at midday, we're told, today. Now, there are urgent efforts underway to see if they can extend this so that they can make it just that bit more viable to start moving people up towards this airbase.
Do we know how many of those so-called 4,000 there, Mark, want to get out? Because not everybody does.
Well, this is the thing. There are unique circumstances for those British passport holders who are in Sudan. Many other countries, there are people there with no connections to Sudan. Most, I would say, of the British passport holders in Sudan are people who are of Sudanese heritage, and they have mothers, fathers, other relatives in that country. And it may be for very legitimate reasons that these people have decided that actually, rather than leaving a very elderly resident or Sudanese relative who wouldn't be able to come to the UK if they don't have a UK passport, they would prefer to stay with them at this very difficult and troubling time. So that may be why we're seeing, in comparison, given that we have, out of all the nations, the most nationals across there in Sudan, we're seeing relatively small numbers so far getting to the airport. I have to say, though, I was listening to the Foreign Secretary being interviewed on, well, Radio 4, let's just say. And, you know, I think it was shocking that most of that interview was all about a gotcha moment, trying to, you know, compare the efforts that Germany and other countries were making in comparison to the UK. Now, they've said this already in recent days, that the reason they took this decision was, you know, agree with it or not, it's a perfectly legitimate decision, which is we're not going to move you while the war is still raging. We'll wait for a ceasefire.
We have many more people there than the Germans, don't we?
Yeah, but it was all about, you know, trying to compare the figures, trying to sort of, you know, point out the inadequacies of the British government-led operation. Now, there may, in the fullness of time, very well be questions to answer and criticisms to put out. But at this time, when you've got people trapped in country, listening for the best advice and a way to get out, why not ask him what's happening when the ceasefire closes at midday today? Are you now advising these people not to try to get to the airbase? Are you trying to extend the ceasefire? What is the reason why we don't think as many British nationals have tried to get to that airbase? These are kind of legitimate questions that are a bit more constructive, I think, than just trying to pick apart the Foreign Secretary for a gotcha moment.
What happened about ships? Are we still trying to get naval ships there to get people out by sea?
Yeah, I mean, that's an option, but at the moment there are plenty of vessels there, right. So there's less urgency for the British to do it themselves, because as long as people can get themselves to the port of Sudan, which is 500 miles east from Khartoum, then there are plenty of ships there. The Saudi Arabian Navy, for instance, has been taking people on what is quite a short distance journey across the Red Sea from the port of Sudan to the Saudi port of Jeddah. So that doesn't appear to be the problem there, and it's a much more benign environment in the port of Sudan. They're trying to ensure that maybe the airport that's in the port of Sudan can be used for flights out as well. So that is another option. It would have been great if that interview had maybe explored some of those points.
It might just be that I misunderstood, but I thought the ceasefire was at midnight tonight, as opposed to 12 noon. Has it changed?
Well, so I heard 12 noon. You might be right. It may be lost in translation.
My money's on you, Mark.
No. Listen,
there is a big time difference too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And, regardless, I think, of whether it's noon or midnight, it's still a very, limited amount of time that they have to try to get rid of, try to get these people up to that airbase. So I think the Americans are going to be trying their level best to see if they can get this ceasefire extended. They managed 3 days. Largely it has held, even though, there have been pockets of artillery and gunfire. We've heard of vehicles being ambushed as they try to make their way to safety. So it's still a very volatile situation.
So apparently, I'm being told, it ends at midnight local time, which is 11 p.m. our time.
You were right, you see.
I did have somebody to tell me that in my ear, though, Mark. But you know what? Joking apart, that 12 hours is a critical difference if you are on the ground in Sudan. That makes the difference between you getting out safe and then what? And then what? If you don't get those planes, then what?
Well, you either decide to stay put and wait to see how the situation deteriorates, or otherwise, there may be a lull in the fighting. The two sides maybe come together, hopefully, to end this feud, or it gets a lot worse. And if you decided to stay put, you're already looking at, power outages, internet is out, communications are very patchy at best. And of course, where are you getting your food and your water as well? So, as I've said over the last couple of days, there are no good options in this scenario. You've got to try to do what you think is best for you and your family.
And the Foreign Secretary is saying, if you do want to get out, go now.
Yes, take advantage of these now less than 12 hours.
Pretty frantic, 12 hours.
You say the Americans helped negotiate this ceasefire. I saw some footage online last night of a Sudanese national, a local man there, saying from his own personal political opinion as a Sudanese, that this is a proxy war between America and Russia, as per we've drawn the parallels with Ukraine at the moment. Do we know what shenanigans are going on behind the scenes, which are either acting as allies to these two rebel war factions? Do we know much about that, Mark?
Well,
should we be worried about that?
Well, we should, yeah. The geopolitical level, everywhere across this planet at the moment, you've got rival factions, not just Russia, of course. You've got China, a very big player in Africa at the moment that is effectively buying influence through, aid and development programs in these countries as well. So, yes, there is a big geopolitical game at play here, which is horrible, when the end result of that is the killing of around 500 people so far in the fighting amongst these rebel groups. Exactly.
Could be much higher now.
Absolutely, and it will be, I'm sure.
And I heard the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, was asked about the inevitable wave of migrants who are going to leave Sudan to head to Britain. Is she going to set up a migrant route? She said no.
Well, yes, she was asked specifically whether a safe and legal route, the same sort of situation as we had in Ukraine, Afghanistan of sorts as well. Of course, that was an effort to get those who were closely linked to the British efforts in Afghanistan out rather than just anybody. But a safe and legal route, she says no, at this stage anyway. I guess it will depend on just how things develop in that country. If it really descends into mass chaos with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people spilling over the borders into neighbouring countries, then there will be a great deal of pressure on the UK government to do something like that. But that is, you know, part and parcel of what the government say they're trying to do with the illegal migration bill.
Which passed in the Commons last night.
Is absolutely to get a grip with the illegal incursions of small boats coming across the English Channel so that we can make informed decisions as a country as to what safe and legal routes we set up at any given time and, you know, assess from year to year just how many asylum seekers, refugees we can accept, given the infrastructure, the amenities and alike, and the support services that we have in this country to be able to deal with them.
Interesting, of course, that the Labour Party voted against the illegal migrants bill last night, the Stop the Boats bill. Yeah,
and actually, you know, going forward, this is, I think, for the UK government, you know, potentially quite a powerful motivating factor to get their base out, because, you know, from their point of view, they feel they've got a very strong message to get across, is that, you know, we're trying to get to grips with the small boats crisis. Labour are not. They don't really have a solution. We should say as well, the Foreign Secretary who I was talking about there is going to be giving an urgent question this afternoon in the Commons, so we'll hear directly from him about the remaining hours of this ceasefire and exactly what they're going to do.
Fascinating. Hairy time.
Mark White.
Always
there.
good to talk to you, Mark.
Bring us the latest. OK. The man behind China's crackdown on democracy in Hong Kong will fly to London next week to attend the King's coronation, sparking anger from MPs.
And don't forget, this is the coronation which is not inviting the Queen's bridesmaid, Pamela Hicks, whose father, Lord Mountbatten, was murdered by the IRA. This man is called Han Zheng. He's a Chinese Communist Party apparatchik, and he did mastermind the crackdown on human rights in Hong Kong.
That's right. This comes as Foreign Secretary James Cleverly used a speech to outline his approach to China, calling for a robust and constructive relationship. Sorry, go on. Our Deputy Political Editor Tom Harwood has this report.
Is China a threat to Britain? A question that seems to have in recent days sent the government squirming. The emerging superpower has in recent months begun to accelerate its military build-up, with potentially grave consequences for Taiwan and global trade through the South China Sea. The Chinese Communist Party has also been ruthlessly oppressing its own people, particularly the Uyghurs, who have faced what many human rights organisations are describing as crimes against humanity, or genocide. Yet this week, the government is refusing to use the word threat.
Some people want me to define our relationship with China in one word. I'm not going to do that.
Indeed, the government doesn't use one word. Instead, it uses two. Instead of threat, we're told China is a, quote, systemic challenge.
With regard to China, it's increasingly clear that China is a country that does have different values to ours. It poses a systemic challenge, and its behaviour is concerning. More authoritarian at home, more assertive overseas, and in light of that, it's right that we take the steps that are necessary to protect ourselves and to stand up for our values.
This is despite the Prime Minister having campaigned last year describing the emerging superpower as, quote, the largest threat to Britain. The former director of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, Luke de Pulford, believes that the government is rowing back on Rishi Sunak's word.
I think the government's position on China is increasingly confusing. We heard from Rishi Sunak when he was on the campaign trail to become Prime Minister that China was our #1 threat. More than that, that he would recognise it on day one of his premiership. He didn't do that. In fact, what we're hearing now from the Foreign Secretary and from the Prime Minister is something very different. We hear about robust pragmatism, whatever that means. That's how we need to engage with China, instead of it being our #1 threat.
Pragmatism here is certainly a shift in rhetoric, and is clearly what defines the government's new approach. To many, pragmatism is the only way to deal with China, given how large a role it plays in the global economy, or with issues like climate change. Rana Mitter is Professor of Politics of Modern China at Oxford University.
there are a whole variety of areas where the UK will have different sorts of conversations and sometimes oppositions to China. When it comes to human rights, clearly China and the UK take very different positions on individual liberties. But when it comes to climate change, it's clear that the agenda of trying to switch to green energy is something that China, the United States, the UK, the EU, all major global economies are going to deal with. And balancing those issues is really where the next generation of UK-China policy is going to have to make choices.
The UK's Asia-Pacific tilt leads to questions of values, trade and global cooperation when it comes to China. As things stand, the government stands accused of trying to have it both ways. Tom Harwood, GB News.
Well, joining us for more on this is Royal Correspondent Michael Cole. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning.
Nice to talk to you. It seems to be shrouded in controversy, this guest list, doesn't it?
Yeah, you've got to remember that the King has got plenty of form on this when he was Prince of Wales. He memorably described the Chinese leadership as ghastly old waxworks. And when President Xi came here, he went AWOL. He didn't turn up at the big events that were laid on in his honour while he was here. I covered the Queen's historic state visit to China, and so I know a little bit about what goes on. And certainly, when he was Prince of Wales anyway, the King was very concerned about Tibet. I think he had a couple of meetings at least with the Dalai Lama. So there is all that history behind us, and we're seeing it come to fruition. But politics comes into it at this stage. Personal preferences have to go and take a back pew, so to speak, at Westminster Abbey.
This invitation, of course, Michael, was to the Chinese president who delegated this invitation to Han Zheng, who did mastermind the crackdown on democratic rights in Hong Kong. But that would be, the invitation to the Chinese president would be at the wish of the Foreign Office and Number 10, not the King.
Of course, and the King is guided at all times by the government of the day in this. He reigns, but they rule. Parliament is sovereign, and the executive is in charge. That means the Prime Minister and his one of his ministers, senior ministers, the Foreign Secretary. So the King has got no say in this. He has had influence elsewhere in the guest list, of course, where it was right and proper. But as a country, we have to take this all into account. China may not be our best friend at the moment, but it's neither is it our enemy. And this is perhaps an unfortunate casting, this person who's coming, who's done so much to the detriment of a wonderful place that used to be called Hong Kong, our crown colony. So maybe he's the wrong man to come, but that's their decision, not ours.
Do you think, I was going to ask you about that, Michael, with your old diplomatic hat on, do you think the Chinese president willfully decided to send this bloke, knowing his role in Hong Kong? He must have been aware that it would cause him the implications of it.
Yeah, very little is done by accident there.
Quite.
Everything is very calculated. I mean, you know, they play the long game. They invented mahjong and all the other thoughtful games that you can think of. So I think this was probably a signal. Of course, it's still very, very current, with many people still wanting to leave the colony. It's very controversial. The fact that the demonstrations have died down in the streets doesn't mean to say that the anger and the hurt and the anxiety of those people who live in Hong Kong about their future, because they reneged essentially on the agreement that we had when Hong Kong was handed back to China, that there would be this 50 years. Well, that 50 years is a very short 50 years.
All right, thank you, Michael.
Can we just ask, before you let you go, Michael, Princess Anne is going to be given a pretty starring role in the coronation, as she had in her mother's funeral. They were very close, of course, and this is a reflection, I think, of Prince Charles's respect for his sister, who's pretty much a stalwart royal who rarely puts a foot wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Princess Anne is going to be gold stick in waiting. Well, she was only 2 years old at the last coronation. She didn't go, unlike her older brother who was there for part of the thing. Now, it's quite interesting. I mean, it sounds wonderful, gold stick in waiting, but it has quite a normal sort of beginning. In 1678, King Charles II was a little bit worried about his safety, so he asked a couple of his captains to walk beside him, carrying a heavy ebony stick with a gold top on it. In other words, they were his minders. So essentially, as Colonel of the Blues and Royals, one of the 2 regiments of the Household Cavalry, Princess Anne will be taking that role. It's a very important thing because loyalty is the essential theme that runs through the coronation. And that was from the very, very beginning, because it stems from the age when changing the monarch was a dangerous business. And it stems from the need to have him protected against his enemies. Well, these days the enemies are different. But on the same page, really, it's important that she is there. He obviously has a great regard for her. When they were children, there was a lot of competition between them, and he felt quite rightly that she was closer to their father, the Duke of Edinburgh, than he was. But they get on extremely well. And of course, she's an excellent horsewoman, and she will be there in the procession taking her part. And as she has done in recent years at the Trooping of the Colour and so on. So it's a nice recognition of a reality that the King's sister is a very close sibling, and has been for a very long time.
OK, thank you, Michael. We're going to have a lot of build-up to this, aren't we, in the next few days?
Certainly are.
Let us know your thoughts on everything this morning, GBViews at gbnews.uk. And up next, we're going to be back on the picket line, bringing you the latest from the teachers' strike. This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. This is To The Point. It is 10 o'clock on GB News with Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce.
Mass walkouts from teachers today, strikes right during the middle of the exam system. How is that affecting you?
A race against time to get British citizens out of Sudan. So will the military be able to get everyone out before this fragile ceasefire ends?
And Health Secretary Stephen Barclay has launched a legal challenge to try to end the ongoing nurses' strike. This is all going on while he's the latest minister now to face allegations of bullying staff. There'll be lots more of those, I can assure you.
Let us know your thoughts on everything we're discussing this morning. gbnews@gbnews.uk is the email address as always. But first of all, here is your latest news with Rhiannon Jones.
Good morning, it's 1 minute past 10. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. British forces are racing to evacuate as many people out of Sudan as possible before the ceasefire ends. 536 individuals with British passports have so far been flown to safety on 6 separate flights. The Foreign Secretary's warned he can't guarantee how many more will depart after today's deadline. Former Brigadier Paul Gibson says there's a huge risk in evacuating without a ceasefire in place.
There's now a huge risk about getting people from Khartoum out to the airfield, and that is a great concern. And I understand fully why the early advice was to stay put, and I think you'll now see huge diplomatic pressure from the Americans particularly to try and extend this ceasefire. Because without a ceasefire in place, moving people out is going to be very difficult.
The government's preparing to unveil the biggest shake-up of gambling in 15 years. The white paper will help redress the power imbalance between punters and operators. It aims to ensure legislation's fit for the digital age following an explosion in online betting. Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser says it will also help prevent addiction. Campaigners say they wanted to include a levy on gambling companies and maximum stakes for online slot machines. Schools in England face disruption as tens of thousands of teachers are on strike today. National Education Union members have walked out over pay. Year 11 and Year 13 classes, though, are expected to be prioritised, with exams just weeks away. More strikes have been announced for the summer term after union members rejected the government's pay offer. Head of Education at the Centre for Policy Studies, Mark Lehane, told us the industrial action has consequences for pupils.
Strikes are continuing to erode the quality of young people's education. And as you were just saying before we came onto this, attendance at schools right now has fallen through the floor. These strikes undermine the credibility that teachers have in terms of saying to children, you need to come into school and get on with stuff. Because as one of your viewers sent in a message just now saying, what credibility do teachers have saying kids need to be in school if they've been closing schools themselves through strikes?
NEU Representative Steve Scott says it's the underfunding that's causing the low pupil attendance.
Attendance levels in schools are falling because we don't now have as many support staff that are able to deal with the pupils with the most need. So those pupils that would have had the support now simply don't have it because there isn't the funding in schools to replace those staff when they leave. So I think actually this strike action, when it leads to a fully funded pay offer from the government, will probably increase student attendance at school because we'll have the support in place for those pupils that need it.
Today, the High Court will hear a legal challenge brought by the government against a planned nurses' strike this weekend. Nurses are set to walk out for 48 hours from Sunday in an ongoing dispute over pay. But Health Secretary Steve Barclay claims the Royal College of Nursing's mandate for industrial action actually runs out on the 1st of May. Mr. Barclay says the court action was prompted after concerns were raised by NHS employers. More than 400 workers from His Majesty's Revenue and Customs will take industrial action in May and June. PCS members will strike for 18 days over the 2 months amid a dispute over pay, pensions, jobs and redundancy. The union says the government has until later today to make a fair offer to stop the strikes. Lost earnings due to long-term sickness is costing the UK economy billions of pounds. That's according to the Institute for Public Policy Research. It estimates lost earnings cost around £43 billion, the equivalent of 2% of GDP in 2021. It's calling for a new Health and Prosperity Act to tackle the issue. Labour claims the government's abandoning first-time buyers. An English housing survey shows that only a third of children born in England this year will own a home by the time they reach their 50s. Labour says it would build more homes and actively support first-time buyers. But the Conservatives have accused Labour of shouting from the sidelines. A YouGov poll has found that almost 3/4 of people in Scotland don't care about the upcoming coronation. The research shows only 6% care a great deal and less than half think Britain should continue to have a monarchy, especially younger people. They feel out of touch with the royal family, with only 20% favouring a continuation of the monarchy. And a waxwork of the Queen Consort has been unveiled at Madame Tussauds in London ahead of the coronation. The figure's styled in a dark blue gown next to King Charles in the throne room. The museum says it marks a new chapter in the British monarchy. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Tens of thousands of teachers are striking today in England. They're walking out in protest over pay. The National Education Union has rejected the government's pay office, which they says is insulting.
Tell you what's insulting, not teaching the kids. All major teaching unions have now rejected the 4.3% wage rise, warning the disruption will get worse unless a deal is reached.
Half of England's schools were closed during last month's industrial action, so how bad is the situation going to be before it gets resolved?
Well, joining us now is maths teacher Bobby Siegel for his reaction. Bobby, just remind me, are you still teaching or just doing some sort of tutoring work?
No, I'm still teaching. I was in school yesterday.
Fantastic. Are you a member of the unions?
Yes, that's right, I am.
Which one? Do you mind me asking which one?
The NEU.
So you are a member of the NEU. OK. Are you supporting the strikes then? Are you actually on strike?
Yes, I am supporting the teacher strikes. And I think the reason I'm doing this is not just because of fairness to teachers, which obviously is important, but I always think about what is the impact of the sort of crunch in pay for teaching. And I think one is you can look at the impact in the classroom. One is, if you look at primary schools, Bev, I think primary schools are at the sort of highest class size for 40 years. And for secondary schools, the highest size we've ever seen. And then I always say, again, I used to work in the city in banking. I used to work at Lehman Brothers, Nomura and PwC before I moved into teaching. And I always say, you look at what the voters or the workers are saying with their feet. And in teaching, what we found is that teacher vacancies are up 37% from last year and up 93% from before the pandemic. So if the government says the conditions are fair, then clearly young people looking to get into teaching are not entering the profession.
What about the kids, Bobby? It's exam time. It's exam time, and you're going on strike during exam time. The worst possible time for these young people.
Yeah, I understand. And what I would
well,
say
if you do understand, why have you gone on strike then?
And with the teacher strikes, what they have said is that they are making exceptions for those who are vulnerable children, children of key workers, and for those that are in exam years. So again, in my school, year 11 students will be having provisions made. So there is still, it's not just a blanket all children, there are provisions being made.
But it's going to have a detrimental effect on some kids, isn't it, in exam time? And that's why you're doing it at this time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the nature of strikes are it will cause disruption. Strikes are not meant to be problem-free for everyone. But if people really care about education, and again, our Prime Minister, when he became Prime Minister, he said one of the key things is a silver bullet for improving the state of our country is education. And even last week, Andrew, he said he wants us to offer a world-class maths education. If you're going to offer a world-class education, you need to make sure that our teachers are compensated fairly. We're not asking for teachers to be given Bugattis, Maseratis, is to make sure that they're paid fairly for what they do.
Bobby, teachers were a disgrace, in my opinion, during the lockdown. Rather than demanding more school closures and more kids being stuck in houses, with some of them with abusive parents, head trauma went up at Great Ormond Street Hospital exponentially during that time. It was a disgrace what the teachers allowed the children to suffer. They've been through too much. Your timing is all wrong. Let things settle. Let these kids get back into education. Give it some time. And then if in 12 months you still feel you've got a case to make, by all means come out in the run-up to the election when it will be very powerful for the government to make a statement. This is not the right time.
So, Bev, one thing I will take contention with your saying it was a disgrace during the pandemic, because schools were still open again for vulnerable children and
all children are vulnerable. Bobby, all children are vulnerable.
Yeah, of course. They were open during the pandemic. Again, that was a government-related thing. Government said schools must be closed, but they kept it open for those who are vulnerable. So again, in terms of timing, I think the nature, if you look at in our country, whether the doctors, the nurses, the rail workers, teachers are not the only organisation or body on strike, and there must be a reason for it. And I understand, I work in economics, there's inflation, there's cost of living crisis, but still, governments have got to make sure that...
Bobby, it's the cynicism of the time. Bobby, it's the cynicism of the timing of this dispute. Kids revising for their exams. It's exam season and you're withdrawing labour. It's going to cause maximum disruption to these kids who, as Bev has pointed out, have already lost months and months of education they can never get back because of the lockdown.
Yeah, and again, regards timing, I would say this is a negotiation. The unions, the last time they spoke to the education secretary was, I think, the Thursday before Easter. And if the education secretary and the government were serious about negotiations, and negotiations, of course, we know how it works. Someone sets a very high demand, someone offers a lower pay, and then you sort of meet in the middle. But the government haven't met since before Easter. So if they really are taking education seriously, they need to come back to the table and negotiate, because that's how negotiations work. It's a to and fro. But at the moment, it's not. Nothing's happening there.
You know, there's 100,000 what are being called ghost children who've never gone back into education since lockdowns. How many teachers in your school are trying to work out where the ones that have gone missing from your school are? How many teachers are feeling that responsibility to these children? Because maybe it's old-fashioned, but I think teachers went into teaching to care for children, not just to care about their bank accounts.
No, again, you're completely right. That's why people go to teaching, because you're passionate about a subject, whether it's maths or English or science, and you want to help young people sort of understand your passion for that subject. But again, if you're thinking about the long-term future of teaching, I always think teachers are not joining the profession, Bev. Again, we said like 93% of vacancies since before the pandemic. 1 in 5 teachers will leave the profession and never enter. I think it's 1 in 3, in fact. 1 in 3 will leave the profession after joining from 5 years. And there is a reason for that, because teaching obviously doesn't offer the sort of career that it did do 5, 10, 15 years back.
How much do you get paid, Bobby? Can we ask you that?
Well, it's about mid-30s, 36, 38,000.
So you're getting more than nurses?
Again, I'm not really a big fan of the narrative of comparing different professions. Again, when the doctors went on strike, people said, oh, doctors earn, a lot compared to rail workers and nurses. And of course, everyone should be paid fairly. But again, you have to look at teachers. They've gone through 3 or 4 years at university. So it's not, again, I'm not asking teachers to be paid a ridiculous salary, but just to make sure that they're paid a fair amount. And again, you have
outstanding holiday provision as well. And I don't want to sit here just be bashing teachers. Everything starts with education. Every society getting better starts with education. We need you guys. We need you there. But I think at the moment, parents who are at home today who can't go to work because they're looking after the kids, they're up to here with it.
But
Bobby, thank you.
Some of my friends who are teachers are parents as well, so they understand the situation.
Sure. We appreciate you coming on and not being afraid of a bit of a robust conversation.
Yeah.
We'll have you back anytime. Thank you, Bobby.
And we shouldn't forget, of course, Bobby gets about 36,000 a year, plus he also has a very good state pension, which will be probably put his salary package more like 45,000, I would say.
And a wonderful work-life balance if you look at the holiday provision.
Oh, but they work all through the summer holidays, apparently. apparently.
They don't. Right.
No.
Over 500 British nationals have been evacuated from Sudan as the military races against time.
The Africa Minister Andrew Mitchell's warning an end to the ceasefire could result in a humanitarian catastrophe, and the Foreign Secretary has also said, that's James Cleverly, no guarantee evacuation flights will continue after the ceasefire ends at 11 p.m. today.
So joining us now is our Home Security Mark White with the latest. People out there are very much against the clock now. Mark, it's the time is ticking to escape.
Yeah, and I mean, that figure of 536 we got overnight, really, so I'm sure it's changed. We'll await an update. We know that the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is going to be making a statement in the Commons at midday today, so hopefully we'll get the very latest on the situation, because I think people out in the region, their families back here, want to know what the advice is really going forward, given that that ceasefire is going to end midnight tonight. There's, you know, ever-dwindling number of hours left before they can get their way to that airbase in the north of Khartoum. Not that it's safe, really, in the scheme of things, to try to do that, but obviously safer than when the war starts raging again. But what will the advice be? Will the British government change its advice? Remember, unlike some other countries, the British government took the decision that while the war is raging, people are being advised, stay at home, it's too unsafe to try to make it to a safer location. Will that change now? Will they just say, look, you know, make your own choice, weigh up the risks yourself and get to that airbase to the north of Khartoum? Hopefully these questions will be answered by James
Some
Cleverly.
people are out there because for their jobs, they're getting well-paid jobs, and they must have been aware of the deteriorating situation in Sudan, Mark. And I know a lot of people watching this programme are thinking, why is the taxpayer picking up the bill to get them out?
Yeah, I mean, there's a unique situation that the UK finds itself in that out of all the nations, the UK has the most in the way of British passport holders out there. Now, unlike a lot of other nations where they've got people that are probably working out as NGOs out there in the charity sector, working for the oil and gas industry, UK citizens that are out there are actually people predominantly of Sudanese heritage. They have family and friends out there. And it may be that the comparatively small number of British passport holders making it to that airbase in recent days is actually a consequence of them weighing up in their own head that, look, rather than leave my elderly mother here who doesn't have a British passport, I'm going to stay with them.
What a terrible dilemma. Mark, thank you so much. We're joined for more on this by journalist Angelica Azadians, who joins us from Cyprus. Good morning, Angelica. What's the situation there with those fleeing Sudan?
And good morning. So the situation, as we know, is quite difficult since the ceasefire finishes tonight and people are in a hurry. They have to flee to both Egyptian and Chad borders, and the ones with British, German and French passports still trying to catch the evacuation flights, and some of them are already in Cyprus, some of them already are yesterday I think it was the first flight to Stansted and people returned to the UK. And yesterday also 8 flights landed in Cyprus with evacuees. And Cyprus authorities are trying to help in any possible way. They accommodate people overnight and... Sorry.
Are there still many British people waiting in Cyprus to get back?
From what I know, they just stay here overnight and there's... go back on the next day. They're it's like 24 hours, maybe a bit more. But yes, there are still some British nationals who are in Cyprus waiting to get on the planes to go to the UK, and probably more to come in the next days if it still be possible, because as we know, the situation is difficult and risky, and some people can't even get to the airport in Sudan, airport, and some will,
All right. Thank you very much. That was Angelica Azadians, in Cyprus journalist.
We've still got Mark White with us. Mark White, a big moment in the Commons last night because the government's much vaunted Stop the Boats legislation went through, sailed through the Commons. No Tory rebellion at all, as I expected. Labour Party voting against it.
Yeah, a big moment for the government. I mean, we still have some way to go because those pesky Lords will no doubt have some amendments of their own that they'll put to the bill, and then it'll end up probably coming back to the Commons again. So it's a big step forward, there is no doubt, for the government. And you're right about the situation that Labour finds itself in, because it wants to show that it is, you know, committed to trying to stop the boats, but it's clearly against so much of the policy that's been put forward by the UK government, in public at least.
I was listening to Keir Starmer being interviewed on the very topic this morning. He finds it a very difficult question to answer, doesn't he? Yeah. Because he basically said, I'm going to crack down on the criminal gangs.
Same old.
He said, I don't want anybody making that perilous journey.
Same
he
old.
said, I need to improve the processing system to get people sorted. I mean, he struggles because he knows it's a vote winner to fix this, but he doesn't want to support the government. Yeah, and this is, I think, going forward, going to be absolutely the way forward for the government in terms of turning the screw on Labour and exposing them for, you know, you heard Andrew saying same old, same old. Well, it is. You know, this has been the mantra for some time. Let's give more money to the National Crime Agency. Well, in truth, that's exactly what the British government has been doing, giving more money to the NCA, who are cooperating with international law enforcement partners on the other side of the channel much more than they ever have. And they are bringing down criminal gangs in greater numbers than they ever have. But the difficulty with that is it is a multi-million, a billion-pound criminal enterprise, and every time they take down a criminal network, others pop in very quickly, because on a good day they can make millions of pounds. And again today, we've got 3 boats in the channel. The weather's not great. I mean, the weather's been lousy for a few months now, but we're still at 5,652 across the channel so far this year.
I was talking to some Tory MPs from the Red Wall seats up in the North and Midlands, and they say this is the biggest issue on their doorstep of the small boats.
Well, and that's understandable because...
And imagine if you're in Kent.
Because, exactly. Well, Dover is far, far away if you're up in the northeast. Yeah. But what they feel is the fact that their local hotel has just been requisitioned by the Home Office, taken out of commission, a hotel, especially in smaller communities, where that hotel is, you know, very, very important in terms of an amenity for the local population. Weddings there, funerals there, other sort of key events that are taking place, and of course business people and tourists that might come to that area denied the opportunity to stay in that hotel because it's being used for a year or 2 years to house X hundred asylum seekers.
OK, thank you, Mark. Right, in just a moment, we're going to get stuck into the latest updates from the Health Secretary's legal challenge to the nurses' strikes. This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin,
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 10:25. You're with To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Now, the Health Secretary is bringing a legal challenge against a proposed 48-hour nurses' strike that starts on Sunday.
The leader of the Royal College of Nursing has accused Steve Barclay of treating healthcare workers like criminals, and he's now being accused of bullying.
Of course he is.
The latest minister.
All this comes as the Health Secretary's allegedly been accused of bullying, as we just said, and bad behaviour by his own civil servants. Well, joining us now for more on this is our national reporter, Paul Hawkins. Paul, what's happening here with this legal challenge? Does it have any chance of success?
One would have thought so. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, but one would have thought so, given that this latest round of industrial action is due to begin at 8 o'clock on Sunday, finish at 8 o'clock on Tuesday, but Monday is the last day of the 6-month window in which they can legally strike. So that is the basis for the government's challenge. That's why they're bringing about this injunction, saying that, look, you can strike from Sunday into Monday and we respect nurses' right to strike. But if you strike into Tuesday, well, that's illegal because that's outside your 6-month window, and you're going to have to go back and reballot your members on industrial action if you then want to strike past Monday. Now, Pat Cullen, the boss of the Royal College of Nurses, we know that she has submitted a witness statement. They will not be legally represented in court, but they've submitted a witness statement. It's a short one, so I'll just read it to you. It says, the Secretary of State relies on oppressive legislation introduced by the Conservative government and designed to limit the ability of trade unions to call on their members to take industrial action. There is one solution to this trade dispute that calls for the Secretary of State to talk to the RCN in the negotiating room rather than using taxpayers' money to unnecessarily fight the RCN in court. So that's their witness statement that's due to be heard very shortly, and then we will have a decision from the judge on whether they're going to block this industrial action that they are bringing about, because the RCN, of course, didn't agree to the government's latest pay offer, which was a lump sum for last year and a 5% pay increase for this year.
Yeah, OK. Thank you very much, Paul. Paul Hawkins there.
You know, I think there's a danger the Royal College of Nurses are going to sacrifice public support, because we've just seen midwives have now voted to accept the pay offer, and we know nurses in Unison Union accepted the pay offer, and what was it, 54% on a 61% turnout voted to reject the offer. I think they're in danger of losing public support.
Yeah, I mean, all credit to the midwives. Thank you, midwives, for a little bit of common sense there. More breaking news about strikes. Train drivers, ASLEF, are going to stage 3 fresh strikes, including, ladies and gentlemen, the day of the FA Cup final on June the 3rd. They're going to be Friday, May the 12th, Wednesday, May the 31st, and Saturday, June the 3rd. They've called the pay offer risible.
And the pay offer that they think is risible would give them, on average, train drivers, a salary of £65,000 a year, which is almost double the national average wage of £32,000 a year, £33,000 a year. And I think this is another spectacular own goal. The FA Cup final this year is being fought between Manchester United and Manchester City. So all those fans coming down from Manchester, from all over the country to Wembley, how are they going to get there?
It's so frustrating. You know, when you go out of your door now these days, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get there anywhere in my car because the traffic jams are horrendous everywhere.
Yep.
There's roadworks everywhere. All the streets are being made into cycle lanes.
Yep.
I have no faith that a train is going to leave. And I know that it's probably going to be late.
Staff shortages.
Staff shortages.
They saunter onto the train late. They're always late. So £65,000 a year they'll be on, but their pay will be up to an average of £65,000 a year. And they say that pay is risible.
Do you think this is Labour playing politics via the unions?
I think this, the whole trade union movement is trying to bring down the Conservative government. I've thought it for a long time. It's coordinated, it's the health unions, it's the teaching unions. The teaching unions deliberately targeting kids during exam season. I think that is spiteful and selfish, but it causes maximum disruption.
Let us know what you think, won't you? gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address. You were talking about teachers. Jackie has said the teachers are putting forward the wrong case for fair pay. They just need to insist they're treated the same as every other public sector worker and be paid for every hour they work over their agreed contract. So clock in and clock out. My daughter is an ex-teacher. She never worked less than 65 hours a week, but only ever got paid for 35 hours.
Yeah, and if parents can be fined for not sending their children to school during term time, why shouldn't teachers be fined for not attending school? Well, they have the right to strike, of course, unless we're going to say that they lose that right to strike. There's a debate about that with nurses, of course, because police officers can't go on strike, nor can members of the armed forces. But teachers are on strike, and now we've heard the wretched train drivers are going on strike.
Yeah, Erica, thank you for getting in touch. Erica says, no sympathy for these people. They're on a good wage. They have 12 weeks holiday every year, good pensions. They can retire at 50 or 55. Those with partners have extra income too. The children of this country should be put first, especially after the COVID shutdowns.
I certainly agree with that, Erica. Now, still to come up, we're going to be looking into claims from one group who are criticising the regulations of COVID vaccinations. That's, though, after your morning news.
Good morning, it's 10:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Foreign Office says only a sustained ceasefire can prevent a humanitarian catastrophe in Sudan. British forces are racing to evacuate as many people as possible before the ceasefire ends later today. We know that so far, more than 530 British citizens have been flown to safety on 6 separate flights. Africa Minister Andrew Mitchell says the UK is continuing to help bring an end to the violence.
It is essential that the ceasefire is maintained and that a political process is secured. If not, the humanitarian consequences will be incalculable. The UK will continue to work tirelessly to help bring an end to the violence and provide vital humanitarian relief.
Schools in England are facing disruption as tens of thousands of teachers belonging to the National Education Union have walked out over pay. Year 11 and Year 13 classes are expected to be prioritised, with exams just weeks away. More strikes have also been announced for the summer term after union members rejected the government's pay offer. And in breaking news, the ASLEF union has announced its train drivers will stage 3 new strikes in their long-running dispute over pay. One of the walkouts will take place on the 3rd of June, the day of the FA Cup final. The government's preparing to unveil the biggest shake-up of gambling in 15 years. The white paper will help redress the power imbalance between punters and operators. It also aims to ensure legislation's fit for the digital age following an explosion in online betting. And a waxwork of the Queen Consort has been unveiled at Madame Tussauds in London ahead of the coronation. The figure's styled in a dark blue gown next to King Charles in the throne room. The museum says it marks a new chapter in the British monarchy. TV online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2471 and 1.1283 euros. The price of gold is £1,603.14 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 sits 7,850 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Well, in just a few more minutes, we're going to have more of today's biggest stories from the front pages of the paper. This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:37. This is To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner. Now, a group calling themselves Perseus, which says it is made up of medical, pharmaceutical and safety management professionals, is calling out the medicine and healthcare regulatory agencies' regulation of COVID vaccines and what that tells us about how safe our drugs might be.
Now, the group's released a report which accuses the MHRA of failing to protect the public. Are its fears justified?
So joining us now to look through this is one of the authors of the report and a spokesperson for the Perseus group, Nick Hunt. Nick, your background is in Ministry of Defence, so how did you get involved in this?
Well, I was a senior civil servant in the Ministry of Defence and I used to be responsible for the safety and effectiveness of ammunition for the armed forces. So when the MHRA licensed the COVID vaccines so quickly, within a year of starting the development and doing the trials, it was obvious to me that there were likely to be shortfalls in the amount of evidence that had been garnered from the trials and a lack of long-term safety data. So I started asking freedom of information requests of the MHRA to understand their process of safety management. And what I found alarmed me greatly. And I pursued it and eventually got together with a group of people from medicine, doctors and so on, pharmaceutical regulation and safety management. And we ended up writing this report, which was published last week, and we're delivering to Downing Street with a petition and sent to all MPs and peers.
There was a great rush to get these vaccines sorted because the crisis in healthcare. People were dying. Thousands of people were dying. Tens of thousands of people were dying.
Well, it was known early on in the development, quite soon after the pandemic started, that the susceptibility to COVID was exponentially lower the further down the age groups you went. And I remember Kate Bingham, who was in charge of the vaccine procurement, saying that it was only going to be rolled out to susceptible older people and not beyond that. And lo and behold, it went beyond that.
But we didn't have to take it, the vaccine.
No, quite.
So,
but I think there's been a lack of transparency in terms of giving people the ability to make informed consent. For example, the vaccines were pushed on the basis of relative effectiveness, not absolute. The risk to a 20-year-old from COVID was very, very low. And even if it was going to be 95% effective, which it was said to be at the time, but that's come down, you know, you're going from 0.00001% or whatever the figure was of that magnitude to a number not very different from that. So it's still very, very low.
And so your argument...
yet the risk from the vaccine was based on limited short-term data and no long-term safety data.
So the reason that you're delivering this report and petition to Downing Street is effectively to say that the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority had a dereliction of duty, that these mRNA drugs were given an emergency use authorisation across the world, in this country as well, which the trial evidence showed was not warranted.
Early on, during the development, the manufacturers themselves of the mRNA ones, Pfizer and Moderna, were publicly saying that they expected the licensing of their vaccines, they called them vaccines, they expected them to be treated as gene therapies, and that there was a degree of novelty about them. And I imagine they were as surprised as anyone else when the MHRA, and indeed other regulators in the US and elsewhere, treated them as vaccines. And the evidential threshold for licensing a vaccine is lower. Some of the testing that you would normally do with a novel medicine wasn't done.
But what's the point to it? What are you getting at? Are you saying that this was reckless, irresponsible of the MHRA? Were they willfully endangering people's health by licensing these vaccines? Is that what you're getting at?
I would only go so far as to say that they're not keeping the public safe in terms of the way they're doing safety management. Another example would be they don't have an absolute target for safety. And by that I mean the aviation industry and the nuclear sector, for example. Aviation, 1 fatal accident per million flying hours. Nuclear, so many nuclear core damage criteria or radiation dose. Whereas the MHRA consider it safe if the benefit outweighs the risk.
Yeah, but look, you know about ammunition, you know about the military sense. What do you know about medicine and vaccines, with respect?
I know a bit about medicine because...
Not as much, presumably, as the people who made the vaccines.
No, clearly.
And people who work for the MHRA are people who are steeped in medicine.
No, clearly, but the principles of safety management are the same, should be the same in all sectors. You've got a novel product, you do trials to assess its safety and effectiveness, and you decide what level of risk you're willing to tolerate.
And I guess your argument...
And then you monitor it in service, sorry.
And I imagine... No, sorry. And I imagine the argument would be that even looking at Pfizer's original trial data, which we don't even know whether the MHRA... They haven't been clear, have they, as to whether they'd even seen that data, that even they unblinded the people who received the vaccine. So, in other words, you wouldn't know whether you've had the placebo or the vaccine. And they unblinded it so that the recipients knew whether they'd had it or not, which is a fundamental... tenet of trials, which you just never... It makes a mockery of the whole evidence base.
You lose the ability to get any long-term safety data
exactly.
from that group.
Yeah. I think, you know what, and I think there are serious questions to be asked. I mean, the MHRA receives about 80% of its funding from pharmaceutical companies. So going forward...
I mean, it's effectively an executive part of the government, isn't it, really? Executive agency.
And we expect it to be impartial. That's what worries me as well, because going forward, if you're a doctor and you're prescribing a painkiller, a statin, something for diabetes, you need to know that the regulatory authority in this country has acted in your best interests.
Well, I think they'll say they did. Well, I think they'll say the vaccine rollout was a great success in this country.
Well, the report actually says the opposite.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
Andrew. It's a
Why do you call yourself Perseus, by the way? Wasn't Perseus a Greek god who slayed the Gorgon?
I'm an engineer by training, so I'm not. I wouldn't.
But it is an odd name for your group, Perseus.
I think it has something to do with
the slayer of Greek
Medusa,
monsters.
Slaying Medusa.
So, which monster are you slaying
here? There's quite a few monsters that need slaying, to be fair.
Is this body a monster? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think there's... my personal objective here is to get better safety management of all medicines in the UK.
Couldn't agree more.
COVID vaccines are a particular example. You go back to 2009 swine flu vaccine and, you know, medicines get withdrawn all the time. They shouldn't have been on the market in the first place.
All right. Well, listen, I applaud you for raising the conversation. It's something, as we go forward, that needs to be had, and it wasn't had enough. Statement from... the MHRA, no vaccine would be approved unless the expected high standards of safety, quality and effectiveness are met. As part of our ongoing rigorous safety monitoring of COVID-19 vaccines, we closely review the yellow card report submitted to us in the UK. Alongside safety data from other sources from the UK and internationally, we work closely with our UK public health partners to evaluate data on the safety and effectiveness of the COVID-19 vaccines. Thanks, Nick. Right, the man behind China's crackdown on democracy in Hong Kong will fly to London next week to attend the King's coronation, sparking anger from MPs. It comes as Foreign Secretary James Cleverly used a speech to outline his new approach to China, calling for a constructive and robust relationship. Our Deputy Political Editor Tom Harwood has this report.
Is China a threat to Britain? A question that seems to have in recent days sent the government squirming. The emerging superpower has in recent months begun to accelerate its military build-up, with potentially grave consequences for Taiwan and global trade through the South China Sea. The Chinese Communist Party has also been ruthlessly oppressing its own people, particularly the Uyghurs, who have faced what many human rights organisations are describing as crimes against humanity, or genocide. Yet this week, the government is refusing to use the word threat.
Some people want me to define our relationship with China in one word. I'm not going to do that.
Indeed, the government doesn't use one word, instead it uses two. Instead of threat, we're told China is a, quote, systemic challenge.
With regard to China, it's increasingly clear that China is a country that does have different values to ours. It poses a systemic challenge, and its behaviour is concerning. More authoritarian at home, more assertive overseas, and in light of that, it's right that we take the steps that are necessary to protect ourselves and to stand up for our values.
This is despite the Prime Minister having campaigned last year describing the emerging superpower as, quote, the largest threat to Britain. The former director of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, Luke de Pulford, believes that the government is rowing back on Rishi Sunak's word.
I think the government's position on China is increasingly confusing. We heard from Rishi Sunak when he was on the campaign trail to become Prime Minister that China was our #1 threat. More than that he would recognise it on day one of his premiership. He didn't do that. In fact, what we're hearing now from the Foreign Secretary and from the Prime Minister is something very different. We hear about robust pragmatism, whatever that means. That's how we need to engage with China, instead of it being our #1 threat.
Pragmatism here is certainly a shift in rhetoric, and is clearly what defines the government's new approach. To many, pragmatism is the only way to deal with China, given how large a role it plays in the global economy, or with issues like climate change. Rana Mitter is Professor of Politics of Modern China at Oxford University.
There are a whole variety of areas where the UK will have different sorts of conversations and sometimes oppositions to China. When it comes to human rights, clearly China and the UK take very different positions on individual liberties. But when it comes to climate change, it's clear that the agenda of trying to switch to green energy is something that China the United States, the UK, the EU, all major global economies are going to deal with. And balancing those issues is really where the next generation of UK-China policy is going to have to make choices.
The UK's Asia-Pacific tilt leads to questions of values, trade, and global cooperation when it comes to China. As things stand, the government stands accused of trying to have it both ways. Tom Harwood, GB News.
Or something.
So, right, big stories of the day now with TV commentator Carol Malone and political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister. Carol, you're on a very short stool.
Do you know what?
We'd just like to point out, we haven't sat you on the naughty step. Not yet, anyway.
I look like I'm 4'6". Yeah. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but anyway,
right,
there we go.
Don't upset our short viewers and listeners, Carol.
Right, shall we start with the front page of the Daily Mail? Invitations to put you off your coronation quiche. We're saying this...
Who's upset? Who's
upset, Carol?
This is outrageous. This is, you know, I mean, invitations to the coronation are few and far between. I think there's only about 2,000 people going. And so Charles has invited the Deputy Vice President of China, a guy who was the architect of the biggest brutal crackdown in Hong Kong, and also he's invited Michelle, what she calls her surname, Michelle O'Neill. Now, she is the leader of the Sinn Féin. Her family is steeped in IRA terror. So her father ran one of the most effective squads. Her cousin ran something called the Death Squad. And she has said publicly, not a few weeks ago, she actually said that the IRA had no choice but to bomb and maim people, which is nonsense. You know, so they had no choice but to come over here and put bombs in pubs and kill women and kids. They had a choice. However, she's been invited to the coronation. But what's even worse is that she's accepted.
Amazing.
This is a woman who, you know, who pours scorn on the monarchy, on the royal family. She's a Republican. But just imagine the upset to all the victims of IRA.
And let's not forget, Sam, you will know this, of course, politically. Sinn Féin MPs who are elected to British Parliament refuse to swear the oath in the Commons because they will not swear the oath to the monarch. And yet this wretched woman is going to be at the coronation.
That's why they don't take their seats in Parliament.
Exactly.
And, you know, clearly this is a really difficult position for the palace, for the government, trying to work out the diplomacy of these
things. It's the government's decision,
it is,
not the King's.
Absolutely. But this is a state event. It's a really difficult tightrope to walk. And obviously, you know, she is an elected official. Diplomatically, it would be very difficult to not invite her. But she does not have to accept.
No, quite.
That's the difference.
Isn't it a sign of progress, though?
Well,
maybe I'm a bit naive about this.
That's what she says. And we all know that history shows that, you know, the killers and the terrorists become the leaders of whatever country eventually. But I just don't know whether it's a little bit soon, you know. And let's not forget the people who've been denied an invitation. One of them is Lady Pamela Hicks, who was the daughter of Lord Mountbatten, who the IRA blew up and killed. So, you know...
And Prince Charles was very close to Lord Mountbatten.
Yeah, and yes, Sam is absolutely right when she says it's a tightrope, but, you know, and you would offend whoever you chose, but the bottom line is better to offend and be on the side of right than to offend and be on the side of wrong. And this is wrong.
And does this mean, then, if she's going to go to the coronation, that her MPs will now start taking their seat in the Commons? They take their salary, they claim expenses, because I've checked.
They have researchers in Parliament.
They do,
have an office.
But they will not swear an oath of allegiance to the monarch.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yet she's going to the coronation.
And also, Baroness Hoey, who is Northern Ireland born, she makes the point that actually a lot of Sinn Féin councillors in Northern Ireland and MLAs, the representatives there, they are preventing certain communities having street parties, coronation parties. There is a great irony in the fact the party is kind of squashing the celebrations for the coronation, yet their leader is planning to attend.
And we shouldn't forget the Chinese element. The Chinese president has willfully put this man on the guest list. He organised the repression of democratic rights in Hong Kong.
I heard you had someone on before who was saying that the government has no choice, but, you know, you do have a choice, and you do, you know, China have not been the best of friends to us, and they certainly were not good in Hong Kong, and their human rights record is appalling, and yet they're there in place of people that we would like to see at this coronation. So, you know, there's only 2,000 people, but he's managed to offend more people. You know, this is
we've got to steer it away from the King because he has no choice.
Well, he
has to follow the advice of the Foreign Office, and ministers decide.
Yeah, and we have diplomatic relations still with China.
We do.
It would be very difficult to...
Even though they're responsible for the genocide of the Uyghur Muslims.
Absolutely. Yes. And clearly Ian Duncan-Smith, and he's part of a group that's very, very keen to highlight all the human rights abuses in China. Yeah. And he's furious about this.
He's saying it's outrageous, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of Tory MPs think that.
Going to your paper, Sam, your front page is splashed with Suella Braverman's police numbers. Of course, she's vowed to get more police officers pounding the streets with a common sense approach to policing. Good news story.
It is, and she's written for our paper. That's why we've put it on the front. She's written exclusively for us.
You're doing very well at that recently. You were the woman in charge of the Rishi Sunak piece about bringing the genders to, or supporting women in the gender wars.
Absolutely. But, you know, in some ways it kind of beggars belief that this has to be said, that common sense policing has to be kind of put out there as a concept, because really all it's saying is police should be tackling crime, not policing Twitter. That they should actually be attending burglaries,
but
which they don't.
Can she translate these fine words and rhetoric in your paper, Sat, into action? Can she compel these wretched chief constables to do policing that people want?
Well, I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? Because policing is operational. She's not there directing who goes out on and pounds the streets. But what they have done, they met their target. They wanted a target of set a target of 20,000 to recruit 20,000 police officers, and they set that in the 2019 election. They've met that target now. She's saying basically she wants bobbies out on the streets where people can see them, where they can actually help prevent crimes, instead of doing paperwork. And so, you know, if that direction comes from the Home Office, then police really should be acting on that.
But, you know, the thing is, she's saying there's 20,000 extra, but where are they? You know, we're now at a peak of officers. There hasn't been this many on the streets since 2004. We have 150,000 on the streets. But one, I don't see where they are. And I just think, you know, you're right about the common sense policing. This will be great news to people watching this programme, because the crimes that really devastate people's lives aren't necessarily the big ones. It's the burglaries, it's the robberies, it's the muggings, it's the car thefts. They really wreck lives. People need to feel safe in their homes. And more cops on the street is going to help us with it.
When did you last see Bobby on the beat?
Well, I'm just saying I don't see them anymore.
Did you see one recently?
No, couldn't tell you when I last saw one.
And they're closing police stations, which are visibility, is all about visibility.
Yeah, you know, but also, Piers, it's like, you know, we're now faced with a situation with the police where there's a trust issue. You know, after the Sarah Everard murder, after all this stuff recently, where, you know, we know how criminals are in the police force. We have a trust issue, so we don't just have a numbers issue, we have a trust issue.
We shouldn't forget, of course, that Theresa May's Home Secretary axed 20,000
Well, this is it. We're only going back to square one.
Exactly.
And we've actually lost all that great experience in the police, so we've got a lot of junior police, and that is part of the problem. Burglaries, you know, it's about 6%, I think, for the, you know, for the conviction rate on burglaries.
I think all crimes, the conviction rate is about... It's 92% on sold of most crimes.
And let's not even go on the rape convictions. Oh, yeah, that's
not... Well, it's essentially been decriminalised because it's so hard to get a conviction on rape, and that's just a terrifying, shocking thing.
And yet cops still say there's not enough numbers. They say they're short of officers. Well, they're not. They've got more than they've had since 2010.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we've got time to do one more story. Let me tell you a little bit about what you guys have been saying at home. Teachers' strikes. David says, I agree with you, Bev. It's disgraceful. All the public sector employees who are on strike need to remember that during the pandemic they continued to receive full pay, whilst at the same time the government spent billions supporting businesses by paying their employees 80% of their salary. This money has to be recovered at some point. And I've checked,
the teachers, the government contribute 23% to their pension. So when they say they're on £35,000 a year, there's a 23% of their salary on top in their pension. Gold-plated pensions.
23% is staggering.
Very nice too.
Amazing. Still to come, we're going to be talking about a record number of sick days has been reached. That's right. And we're also going to be back on the picket line, bringing you the latest from the teachers' strike. This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11 o'clock.
Yes,
Welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce.
Well, we've got mass walkouts from teachers across the country today. They're protesting over pay, and of course, it's right slap bang during the exam season.
A race against time to get British citizens out of Sudan. Will the military be able to get everyone out to escape to safety before the fragile ceasefire ends?
And the Health Secretary's in the High Court today, challenging the nurses over the timing of their strike. This is going on at the same time Steve Barclay's facing claims he's the latest minister to bully staff. We'll get to the bottom of that drama as it unfolds.
Very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us here on GB News. Keep your thoughts coming to us. We've got piles of emails coming in. We're going to get to them as much as we can. gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, let's get you up to date with what's happening here and around the world with Rhiannon Jones.
Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Foreign Office says only a sustained ceasefire can prevent a humanitarian catastrophe in Sudan. British forces are racing to evacuate as many people as possible before the ceasefire ends later today. We know that so far more than 530 British citizens have been flown to safety on 6 separate flights. Africa Minister Andrew Mitchell says the UK is continuing to help bring an end to the violence.
It is essential that the ceasefire is maintained and that a political process is secured. If not, the humanitarian consequences will be incalculable. The UK will continue to work tirelessly to help bring an end to the violence and provide vital humanitarian relief.
The government's preparing to unveil the biggest shake-up of gambling in 15 years. The White Paper will help redress the power imbalance between punters and operators. It aims to ensure legislation's fit for the digital age following an explosion in online betting. Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser says it'll also help prevent addiction. Campaigners say they want it to include a levy on gambling companies and maximum stakes for online slot machines. Schools in England face disruption as tens of thousands of teachers are on strike today. National Education Union members have walked out over pay. Year 11 and Year 13 classes are expected to be prioritised, with exams just weeks away. More strikes have been announced for the summer term after union members rejected the government's pay offer. Head of Education at the Centre for Policy Studies, Mark Lehane, told us the industrial action has consequences for pupils.
Strikes are continuing to erode the quality of young people's education. And as you were just saying before we came onto this, attendance at schools right now has fallen through the floor. These strikes undermine the credibility that teachers have in terms of saying to children, you need to come into school and get on with stuff. Because as one of your viewers sent in a message just now saying, what credibility do teachers have saying kids need to be in school if they've been closing schools themselves through strikes?
NEU Representative Steve Scott says it's the underfunding that's causing the low pupil attendance.
Attendance levels in schools are falling because we don't now have as many support staff that are able to deal with the pupils with the most need. So those pupils that would have had the support now simply don't have it because there isn't the funding in schools to replace those staff when they leave. So I think actually this strike action, when it leads to a fully funded pay offer from the government, will probably increase student attendance at school because we'll have the support in place for those pupils that need it.
The High Court's hearing a legal challenge today brought by the government against a planned nurses' strike this weekend. Nurses are set to walk out for 48 hours from Sunday in their ongoing dispute over pay. Health Secretary Steve Barclay claims the Royal College of Nursing's mandate for industrial action actually runs out on the 1st of May. Mr Barclay says the court action was prompted after concerns were raised by NHS employers. And the ASLEF union has announced its train drivers will stage 3 new strikes in their long-running dispute over pay. 2 of the walkouts will happen in May and 1 will take place on the 3rd of June, the day of the FA Cup final. It's after the union rejected a 4% pay offer. And more than 400 workers from His Majesty's Revenue and Customs will take industrial action in May and June. PCS members will strike for 18 days over the 2 months amid a dispute over pay, pensions, jobs and redundancy. The union says the government has until later today to make a fair offer to stop the strikes. Labour claims the government is abandoning first-time buyers. An English housing survey shows that only 1/3 of children born in England this year will own a home by the time they reach their 50s. Labour says it will build more homes and actively support first-time buyers. But the Conservatives have accused Labour of shouting from the sidelines. A YouGov poll has found that almost 3/4 of people in Scotland don't care about the upcoming coronation. The research shows only 6% care a great deal and less than half think Britain should continue with the monarchy. Especially younger people, they feel out of touch with the royal family, with only 20% favouring a continuation of the monarchy. And a waxwork of the Queen Consort has been unveiled at Madame Tussauds in London ahead of the coronation. The figure's styled in a dark blue gown next to King Charles in the throne room. The museum says it marks a new chapter in the British monarchy. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Andrea Beth.
Good morning.
Talking strikes again. We can't get away from these strikes. These ASLEF drivers, I'm astonished about this strike. 3 days of strikes. They've rejected a pay offer which will put their average pay, the train drivers, on £65,000 a year. That's before overtime.
Do you know what as well? It's the cynical nature of the fact that they've chosen the day of the FA Cup final in my hometown. I don't think the fact that it's my hometown was any part of the decision. But in Manchester, Man City versus Man United, FA Cup final, no trains. There may be some running. They normally do a skeleton service.
But they're doing it to cause maximum effect. And of course, what the unions say is strikes are meant to be effective. That's why the teachers are striking during the exam season. Wicked. In my view. Wicked.
Life feels really hard right now for everybody. Doesn't it just feel hard? Nothing works. You go into the shop, there's never anybody working on a till, none of the tech is working anywhere. You try to phone somebody to sort something out, nobody picks up a phone. You go out, you can't get anywhere on public transport.
Try and pay for your parking meter too, and you've got to use an app now.
Absolutely. It's all of that stuff. Everyone's feeling very weighed down by it, aren't you? Let's see what you can say.
And I think these unions are working in cahoots with the Labour Party to try and bring down this Conservative government because they've been in power for 13 years.
They must be smelling blood, right? That's what it feels like. They're smelling blood at the moment, and so they really are ramping up the strikes. Gary said all these public sector workers that are on strike have fantastic pensions compared to the private sector. Why won't someone make the case they could reduce their pension benefits and take this as increased pay instead? Great idea, Gary.
Well, and I checked the figure. The teachers get 23% contribution to their pension from the taxpayer. So that puts a lot more than £36,000 a year. Who was the teacher we were talking to?
Yeah. Right, anyway, keep your views coming, won't you, this morning? gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, tens of thousands of teachers, as we were saying, in England will walk out today after members of the NEU rejected the government's pay offer, calling it insulting.
So that's all the teaching unions have now rejected the 4.3% wage rise, which is for next year, and they were to get a £1,000 lump sum this year. This is what Gillian Keegan, the Secretary of State of Education, said today.
I think it was a fair and reasonable offer. The offer, just for your listeners, was £1,000 on top of a 5.4% pay rise, which was recommended by the independent pay review body, up to 8.9% for new teachers. So we offered £1,000 on top for that. And then for this 23-24, we offered 4.5%, and that was for a period when inflation is predicted to be below 2%. So it was a above inflation pay rise. And crucially, and most importantly, and I think this is probably one of the reasons that it was rejected, it was fully funded. And I think there's been some misunderstanding about that. And actually, we've got more communications ongoing from the department to make sure everybody understands that it was fully funded.
Well, let's go to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, for the latest now. Good morning, Darren. I don't know whether you just heard us having a bit of a rant. Life feels quite difficult for people at the moment. That day-to-day experience is what is going to affect voter intention in what might be, 18 months or so. This is a massive problem for the Conservatives, so many industries striking.
Yeah, indeed, and no end in sight to those strikes. As you say, we're on the 5th day of teacher strikes today. We've got those new rail strikes announced this morning, with effectively the rail union saying that 4% is simply not acceptable when inflation is still running at 10%. Now, the government's point of view on all of that is that by massive pay rises, whether in the private sector or the public sector, that is only going to make inflation worse and mean that people's living standards will slip away for longer. But from the union's point of view, they simply say, this is just not acceptable. And I heard your discussion earlier on about people in the private sector not having as good a contributions in terms of their pensions or indeed perks with their jobs. And obviously the unions would make the case is that's because they're prepared to fight on those workers' behalf. So the reason that they've got a decent wage and good pensions is because they are able to force the government to the negotiating table to get better deals for their workers, which is their primary job. And with union membership having fallen in the private sector, it's one of the reasons that they maybe are not doing as well. But you raise a much bigger political point here, Bev, which is quite important, and that is how does the general public feel about all of this? We know there are frustrations. We know that everyone is not on the side of these strikes, not least of all when it comes to people like the railway unions. Now, there's a lot more sympathy for junior doctors, for example, but more specifically, I think, for nurses in the National Health Service. The question is, will the public stop blaming the government for all of this? Will they get so weighed down if these strikes continue that, frankly, they think we've had enough of this and the government clearly can sort that out? And that, as you rightly point out, is a real danger for Rishi Sunak and for the Conservative Party.
Darren, I wonder if public opinion will turn against the unions, actually. And when we hear now that ASLEF are going to go on 3 days of strikes next month, including targeting the FA Cup final, 2 teams from Manchester at Wembley, that's going to be hugely disruptive for the football. Desperately cynical by ASLEF, and I don't think they'll have the public on their side. The pay rise will give them an average salaries of £65,000, double the national average.
Yeah, indeed, and there will be frustration because one of the lines affected is the Avanti West Coast line, which is clearly the line from Manchester down to London, though that service, irrespective of strikes, has been in a pretty bad state for quite a long period of time. Avanti just having the contract renewed for another 6 months. But you're right, there will be frustration here, and this is the really interesting thing to try and work out. Will that frustration be towards the unions, where people are frustrated enough, or will be towards the government, where they feel that, well, in the end, someone needs to compromise here, someone needs to cave in. And there is also the prospect, frankly, and let's be honest about this, where workers will only be able to go on strike for a certain period of time. At the end of the day, you do not get paid for strike days. And I think someone worked out that actually the rail unions, if they had accepted the government's offer last year, would have ended up in a better position financially than they had done with all the strike days and the lost pay. Though the unions, of course, would suggest this is not just about pay, it's also about conditions and about how the railways are run in the future. But yes, they are specifically taking charge of specific days to cause maximum damage. They are coordinating some of this action, there's no doubt about that. There is a massive political element to this. There's little doubt that unions want to see the government change. But in the end, Rishi Sunak has pledged that he wants to bring these strikes to an end. And we stand here, pretty much nearly a year into these strikes now of various different industries, and there is no prospect in sight that these are going to come to an end. And that is a massive headache for the government because, as you say, whether it's schools, whether it's hospitals, whether it's the railways, there is a sense that Britain simply isn't kind of effectively working quite well at the moment.
And Darren, just finally, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, he's effectively in the High Court today to try to limit the nurses' strike. They say that effectively their mandate has expired. And we read as well, don't we, in the paper, say that he's the latest minister to be accused of bullying by the civil servants. Well, we could all have predicted that after Rishi Sunak chucked Dominic Raab, the Justice Secretary, under the proverbial bus last week.
Yeah, and there's real concern within government that effectively it's a kind of open field day now to target different cabinet ministers. As you say, 2 anonymous sources have come forward to The Guardian to say that they feel that they're being bullied by Steve Barclay. They talked about how they'd raised concerns that he was constantly angry, he had blasted staff in front of others in the office. And again, that will raise that argument about whether that does effectively constitute bullying. For many people, that's simply the rough and tumble of life in work, though as I say, that is an argument that's taking place not just within government or the civil service, but across the country too, about what is acceptable in the workplace these days. But yes, there is concern politically that these civil servants, or a group of civil servants, are effectively picking off different cabinet ministers, and that they will not stop with Dominic Raab or indeed potentially Steve Barclay. Now, it must be said, there have been no formal complaints. The government have made it clear that they have not heard anything. And as one senior Conservative said, this is all drivel. They said this is absolutely the worst of the civil service. There are lots of brilliant people doing extremely hard works, but in the end, they are breaking the civil service code to brief and actually lie to the media. I don't even like Dominic Raab. This is a senior Conservative MP, but I think he is 100% right about this idea that there is a somewhat coordinated campaign. Saying that, these are anonymous sources. Obviously, they've got the right to be heard. We'll see whether there's a formal complaint. Until then, I'm not entirely sure the government's going to act in any way on this.
OK.
Darren McCaffrey, our political editor. I've known Steve Barclay for 10 years. I like him.
He seems like a nice guy.
He's not a bully.
No.
He's thorough. He's very down to earth. He's a northerner. He's an ex-army. He is not a bully. And I'm amazed that he's the next one to be in the firing line of these civil servants. Just grow some.
You know, we've been talking about the police, of course, and whether with these increased police numbers of 20,000, but obviously it doesn't matter unless it's solving more crimes and putting more baddies behind bars. We've got the latest crime stats have just been released this morning. Stick around for those. You're with Bev and Andrew on GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 11:19 with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner on GB News. This is To The Point.
So, data released today from the Crime Survey for England and Wales shows that a rise in gun crime because of a growing presence of imitation firearms.
The use of imitation firearms, anything which looks like a gun, regardless of whether it can shoot a bullet, is recorded by police rose 22% last year, from 1,800 in 2021 to 2,200 in 2022.
It's now the most prevalent principal weapon in those type of offences, according to the Office for National Statistics.
Simon Harding is a former senior investigating officer at the Metropolitan Police and joins us now. Simon, this is really worrying because people aren't going to know whether this is an imitation or not.
Yeah, I think that's the point, really, that, you know, it's got quite a wide scope, that definition of imitation firearm. If we go back sort of 20, 30 years, you know, there's been cases where somebody's put their fingers in their jacket pocket and pointed it at someone in order to rob them, and that was held to be an imitation firearm. But of course, then you get to this other sort of stage where now being the principal weapon in firearm-enabled crime, it's a worry, and it's a worry on two sides. One is obviously for the victim thinking that what they're being faced with, but secondly also, you know, what you put yourself into potentially if you're seen by police officers with firearms, if you're carrying something like that, is obviously a situation where you could be shot. And of course that is, you know, really something which people don't really take into consideration.
And it must be traumatic as well for the victim to have somebody wielding what they think is a gun at them. They're going to hand over, aren't they, whatever valuables they've got. Should the court treat people who do deploy imitation firearms, Simon, should they treat them as almost as bad as if they were carrying a real gun?
Well, there are. I mean, the Firearms Act itself goes back to, I think, 1968. So that's the last time it was, looked at. But things like sentencing guidelines are things that always change. And I think the last one was around about January 21 for firearms, and a sort of a maximum sentence of possession of an imitation firearm with a fear to cause violence, you know, for example, is that carries a maximum of 10 years. But then that's graded in the kind of crime that it's been used within, and what's been said and everything else that goes behind it. So I think probably when you're looking at the Firearms Acts and other acts in Parliament, which are considerably older now, that, you know, the world has changed, and perhaps a review of how things are looked at now is probably due, I would have thought.
What about confidence in the police, Simon? What do you make about that now?
Well, I mean, it's hard, isn't it? I mean, you know, I retired in 21, and I think it was low then, and obviously since that time with the various cases that we've seen from Carrick and the murder of Sarah Everard, then it's obviously at its all-time low. And I still speak to colleagues and friends who are in the police, and they're struggling. And I think one of the things that people need to look at, and which is showing now, is that there is a problem in actually retaining officers who are the good officers that are doing things, because they just can't take any more being tarred with the same brush. And I think equally you have this problem where you can't actually recruit people at the moment. We're not fulfilling that quota of 20,000. That's definitely not happening because there's more people leaving, obviously. So it is a problem, and morale is at its lowest. But, now we've had all this, we've had the Casey report, people have got to be given, when I say people, Mark Rowley and the Met and other officers, senior officers around the country have got to be given a chance to turn this around now.
What else do we know from these figures, Simon, sorry. What else do we know from these figures about the state of crime in this country?
Well, I suppose when you look at them, I mean, generally speaking, it's sort of a 12% decrease in crime overall. But, I tend to look at some of the more specific crimes, like sexual offences, for example, is, and violence against women, that's still up. And it's 49,000 offences of knife-enabled crime still. Even though that says it's down by 9%, that's a real small percentage, isn't it? I mean, when you think about it. So that's still a worry. The carrying of knives is something which, having worked in murder teams for many years, and to see that the devastation that knives and of course guns can bring is a real concern. But, you look at other things, there's a lot of downward trends in crime. Burglary and things like that are down 23%. So there's some good news amongst it, but I kind of look at those ones which have more impact on individuals and families.
Yeah, OK. Thank you, Simon. Simon Harding there, former Senior Investigating Officer at the Met Police.
Now, it's a race against time in Sudan because the ceasefire ends at 11 p.m. British time. 500 British nationals have been evacuated so far.
That's right. The military is racing against the clock to bring people to safety. Africa Minister Andrew Mitchell warned that an end to the ceasefire could result in a humanitarian catastrophe, with the Foreign Secretary warning there was no guarantee that evacuation flights would continue after the ceasefire ends.
Well, let's get more on this from the Director of Research at the Henry Jackson Society, Mark Sidwell. Mark, it's grim reality, isn't it? If once the ceasefire ends, it's going to be pretty risky for the government, for the RAF to try to get anybody out.
Absolutely. I'm afraid, Andrew, it's an incredibly dangerous situation already. I mean, there are signs of the ceasefire itself creaking and being sort of broken by small attacks or accusations of it, even before the ceasefire ends. It's extremely difficult for people to get around. And it is, I think, a tremendous tribute to the British troops who are there, that they've managed to organise and maintain security around the airfield. And I think there's some 160 British troops there at the moment at Wadi Sedna. And, they're doing great work. And I think they've said they're going to stay as long as they can to get as many people out as they can. But of course, part of the problem is can people get themselves, and there are thousands of people that we'd love to get out, but can they actually get themselves to the airport to take the flights?
The Foreign Secretary is making a statement in the Commons this afternoon. That's James Cleverly. And there will be some criticism that perhaps we were slower than Germany, but Germany was evacuating its nationals while literally gunfire was raging all around Khartoum. The British government took a decision not to do that until there was a ceasefire. Do you think that was the right decision?
The British government decided to focus on its diplomats and getting them out as fast as possible. That was because there was a very real and credible threat to the diplomatic quarter. It was an extremely dangerous part of the city they were in. And so I think that was extremely important. And, we don't notice things when they go well. That operation went extremely well, and it wasn't obvious that would go as well as it has. So I think that was the right decision. It is very, very hard to get out all these British nationals. They're not coordinated in the same location in the same way. It's a harder problem, and in many cases it seemed like it was safer for them to stay where they were. But obviously, as the situation gets worse and seems like it doesn't have an immediate end, it does seem like we should try and get everyone out as soon as we can. It
didn't sort of happen overnight, this conflict, did it, Henry? Sorry, Mark, from the Henry Jackson Society. Easy mistake to make. It didn't happen overnight, did it? I mean, this has been rumbling on. I mean, this country, we established yesterday 12 years of peace in the last 68 in Sudan. The people that are living there, were living there, they knew the risks, didn't they?
Well, to some extent. But look, I think if there's one thing the government can perhaps be criticised for, it was its optimism. The British government's been very involved in the really tremendous opportunity that was there for Sudan to move to civilian government, to democratic processes, and it was very, very close to that. And if that had happened, it would have been a tremendous strategic prize, and we should have been very proud of the fact that we were involved in that, and it very nearly came off. Now, because of that optimism, perhaps we didn't prepare enough for things suddenly going south quite as fast as they had, with these military groups coming out and fighting each other instead of doing what they agreed to do, which is to make this transition to civilian government. So I think we were focused on the prize, and we perhaps didn't spend enough time thinking about exactly how badly things might go wrong and how fast they would go wrong if that did happen.
There is an echo there, isn't there, Mark, of what happened in Kabul, because I'm sure it was the Americans which precipitated the crisis because they withdrew, but the British government didn't anticipate the Taliban getting into Kabul quite so quickly, and the evacuation potentially could have been catastrophic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this I think happened even faster than Kabul, although Kabul was also extremely swift relative to anyone's sort of plans in advance. But of course, what the real issue in Afghanistan was about whether we were standing by the translators and the allies and the locals who had really helped us out. And the tragedy there was the extent, America too, but the extent to which we perhaps didn't stand by the people who had been our staunch allies in the region. And I do think it's far too early to talk about anything like this, and there perhaps isn't quite the same situation in Sudan. But I do hope that, the people who are our allies and have worked with us locally, to the extent that they're in danger, that we do support them in it and learn some lessons from Afghanistan.
OK.
We didn't, but there's some of those translators are still there.
It's shocking, isn't it? It's absolutely horrendous. Mark, sorry, we've got to move on. Mark Sidwell there from the Henry Jackson Society. You've been getting in touch this morning. We're about to talk about this controversial coronation guest list. Paddy says, this is about Michelle O'Neill from Sinn Féin being invited. And Paddy said, I served 9 tours in Northern Ireland at the height of the Troubles. If Sinn Féin are at the coronation, I say good, it's progress. It's peace, and we should all recognise that.
Yeah, and George says, I'm the monarchist to end all monarchists, but despite that, I'm not going to be watching the coronation because of that guest list. That and the quiche make me feel the monarchy's lost touch of people. But George, to be fair to the King and the Queen, this guest list is dictated not so much by him, but the government has a huge say in it. They would have invited the leader of Sinn Féin. I
think you're being quicheist, George. I don't know what your problem is with quiche.
Yeah,
what food will make you watch the coronation? Quite like a bit of quiche, bit of salad. You've got to have coleslaw with your quiche.
But it is a French recipe for the quiche, isn't it? And nothing against the French, but they weren't very keen on monarchy. You know what happened to Let Her Eat Cake, Marie Antoinette, off with her head.
What would you have as your British meal for the coronation?
Well, we had coronation chicken for the Queen.
But that's Indian flavouring. That's the empire, right?
Empire, yeah. And of course we'd given up India in 1948, so and we don't have an empire anymore.
Well,
why couldn't they have meat pie?
Our national dish apparently is chicken tikka masala. You know that. That's the most popular dish that people eat in this country. Make of that what you will.
Steak and kidney pud.
It's warm summer's day. You can't have a steak and kidney pudding on a warm summer's day. Right. Well, fingers crossed. If it's anything like the weather at the moment, it's raining non-stop.
The weather forecast for the coronation is very positive.
Good. Let's hope so. We're going to be having our guests back in the studio. Carol and Sam Lister are going to be here as well. We're going to be talking about the fact that we've had more sick days this year than any other year on record. What's that all about?
Most of them in the civil service too.
We're going to be talking about these allegations as well about Steve Barclay's job as Health Secretary. All of that after your morning's news with Rhiannon.
Bev, thank you. It's 11:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Foreign Office says only a sustained ceasefire can prevent a humanitarian catastrophe in Sudan. British forces are racing to evacuate as many people as possible before the ceasefire ends later today. We know that so far more than 530 British citizens have been flown to safety on 6 separate flights. Africa Minister Andrew Mitchell says the UK is continuing to help bring an end to the violence.
A long-term ceasefire is essential in Sudan. Failure to have that and a resumption of fighting will lead to a humanitarian catastrophe there, because there's already 60 million people who are very short of food, and there's no humanitarians there because they've left. 5 of them, indeed, have been murdered.
Schools in England are facing disruption as tens of thousands of teachers belonging to the National Education Union have walked out over pay. Year 11 and Year 13 classes are expected to be prioritised, with exams just weeks away. More strikes have also been announced for the summer term after union members rejected the government's pay offer. Meanwhile, the ASLEF union has announced its train drivers will stage 3 new strikes in their long-running dispute over pay. 2 of the walkouts will happen in May, and 1 will take place on the 3rd of June, the day of the FA Cup final. It's after the union rejected a 4% pay offer. The government's preparing to unveil the biggest shake-up of gambling laws in 15 years. The white paper will help to redress the power imbalance between punters and operators. It also aims to ensure legislation's fit for the digital age following a huge increase in online betting. And a waxwork of the Queen Consort has been unveiled at Madame Tussauds in London ahead of the coronation. The figure's styled in a dark blue gown next to King Charles in the throne room. The museum says it marks a new chapter in the British monarchy. TV online, DAB digital and TuneIn radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2449 and 1.1281 euros. The price of gold is £1,605.42 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 sits 7,854 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Oh, hello, good morning. It's 11:34. This is To The Point on GB News with Andrew and Bev. In just a few moments, we're going to have more of the day's biggest stories. You're watching Britain's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's News Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's News Channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's News Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope? It's very much so. And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11:38. Thank you for watching us. This is To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
She was making a noise, wasn't she? She was
two.
making a noise, Karen Malone. She always makes a noise. She always makes a noise. She is, of course, well known.
I'm better though, I'm higher.
GB News.
I'm higher.
And, of course, lovely Sam Lister, political editor of the Daily Express.
Right, let's talk about Braverman warning that woke police who show support for political causes are undermining Britain's democratic freedoms. Sam, what's this about?
Yeah, I think Suella Braverman's laying down a marker here to police. Stop taking the knee. She's quite annoyed about police taking the knee.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Yes, good.
She's also annoyed about police, policing Twitter. You know, we had the famous case of Harry Miller, a retired police officer. The officers turned up at his door because he'd made comments about trans people on Twitter. And she's saying, look, this stuff's got to stop.
Good.
You know, focus on actual crimes, focus on burglaries, go out to things that people want. And I think the head of the CPS gave evidence to the Home Affairs Committee recently where he admitted basically the police only spend 1 day a week actually on tackling crime. The rest of it is on paperwork, safeguarding,
social
crime
services
prevention.
work.
Yeah. So, you know, I think she's basically saying this has all got to stop. You've just got to get out there and do some proper policing.
You know what gets me though, Sam? How can she make it stop? Because the people that dictate what happens to their cops are the heads of the forces, and we've seen this happen. You know, it still shocks me when I saw cops kneeling to Black Lives Matter protesters. It really shocks me. You know, this is an organisation that was founded by Marxists to dissemble America, and you think, why are they kneeling to that?
It also wants to capsize the capitalist system.
To defund the police, incredibly. But, you know, she's telling them to ditch political correctness. But what happens if they don't? What happens if they, you know, the general public are sick to death of seeing them giving protesters tea and biscuits, giving them water.
Sunblock.
Sunblock, yeah, when they've glued themselves to the road and they've brought the city to a standstill. So I think people are really sick of it. But I want to know what she's going to do.
Because, of course, the police officers would say, that's all very well for you to say that, but actually my promotion might depend on me offering to be the diversity officer in my, in my department. Within the forces themselves, there's a huge amount of emphasis on these sorts of issues. And that's where she's...
They must be made aware, though, that their promotion is in danger if they do this. They must be told. And it's all very well her saying this, and I'm behind Suella on a lot of the stuff that she does, but she's got to give them consequences if they don't. They've got to be made clear to them. And that
there should be targets.
Yeah.
There should be targets. How much policing they do every week, not 1 day, should be 4 days.
Yes.
Shouldn't it?
And promotions should be dependent on results, surely.
And detection rates. Detection. Investigate. Because we were saying earlier, Carol, if you get... I was burgled a long time ago. It was horrible.
They're not interested.
They weren't interested.
That's just... Even if... you know, I remember when they came to my house and they took fingerprints and they went, oh, we know who this is. This is the bloke who's been in prison before for this. Was he ever arrested? No. Nah. Of course, they don't care.
Because it doesn't get enough points. I was mentioning taking the knee. Do you wonder if Keir Starmer will regret taking the knee, the Labour leader, which he did with some members of his shadow cabinet?
I think that's a picture that the Conservatives will use a lot when we're in the run-up to the next
and so
election.
they should. Because it stopped, I think, at a lot of these football matches now.
Well, yes, it has. It has stopped. But, I mean, wait till the next... That was the thing then. There'll be something else in terms of wokeism. You know, they stood by and watched protesters pull a statue down in Bristol, do you remember?
Edward Colston.
Yeah, Edward Colston. So they've got to stop... And they show preference and they're supposed to be impartial. And you know, you can only police by, you know, when the public are on your side, and the public are not on their side over this. So...
And we've got this very strange thing where we've got the police being woke, but we've also got huge numbers of officers who are being investigated for
criminals.
abuse, sexual offences. That there are quite a number of officers in the Met who are serving who are actually have convictions. So, you know, we've got this very strange thing where everything's about being kind of right on, but actually we've got police who've committed crimes.
And we've got all these new police officers now. They've reached the 20,000 target. But I wonder if they've cut any corners to get the target, if they've done the proper
well, that was the thing. There was a lot of kind of diversity lists, wasn't there?
Yeah.
So for recruiting cops, you had to fit a certain criteria. You had to tick certain boxes. That's not what should happen. You've got to pick people who are suitable for the job. Not everyone can do that job. So you've got to pick the right people, basically.
Can we talk about record number of sick days?
Oh, I thought we dumped that one.
No, I've been telling the audience we're going to talk about that, so we can't dump it. 185 million working days are lost to sickness and injury. Sam, what's going on?
I think it's because we've actually got more older people in work, and so actually a lot of the people who are taking these 6 days are older people and women. So I can't really explain why women take more.
Is that what the statistics bear out?
Yeah. So, but clearly, like as you have an older workforce, you are going to have more problems with sickness. That's just inevitable. But you know, clearly the government wants over 50s in work. So you know, this
it
is some
doesn't play into the
consequences.
idea, does it, that the millennials are the ones who are always skiving off because they've got a hangover, Carol?
Well, I think you're right, because I think that during the pandemic as well, we lost 500,000 workers. They're now called. What's the phrase? There's a phrase for them there. Anyway, there's 500,000 people left work during the pandemic, and they haven't gone back. So that's a big thing. But I mean, I think
is it the NEETs, not in educational training?
No, it's not that.
No,
See, I had my notes and I left them out there because I thought we weren't doing it.
Right.
So I just say not much on that.
Anyway, if you're sick and at home watching this, let us know why. GBNews.uk.
You want to talk about Steve Barclay,
I want to talk about Steve Barclay. Now, so, as Dominic Raab predicted in his resignation speech when he had to resign...
Which was a very feisty resignation letter.
Very feisty resignation letter. He said this would open the door for spurious complaints against other ministers. And that's exactly what's happened, because now... Steve Barclay is now being accused of bullying. Funny that, isn't it? And it didn't take very long. It's taken less than a week. And he's been accused. It's been said that he's got the same kind of rough and tumble way of governing as Dominic Raab had. And we're now in the situation where no boss, no government minister can tell anyone off for not doing their job properly without being called a bully. You know, the civil service they really are, they're a left-wing, left-biased, anti-Brexit biased organisation which hates the Tories and hates the government. And now, and I think it's because Sunak didn't stick by Raab last week, it means that no minister in the government can effectively police their own department now. They can't tell anyone off for not doing their job right.
And the Health Secretary is pitched in a titanic battle with the health unions.
Yeah.
And, of course, this story that he's facing bullying allegations leaked to The Guardian, and the Civil Service Union, the FDA, got Raab. They'll go for Suella Braverman as well.
And well, they are going, because you'll know this, Piers, being in the House, and Sam will probably too, that there's now a whispering campaign against her. They're going to bring up more allegations of, breaking the ministerial code. So they've got her on their side. So this is 3 ministers they might try and get rid of.
But what's interesting about this is that actually no official complaint has been made about Steve Barclay.
No.
They've gone to The Guardian. There's not actually any complaint. And the complaint actually seems to be he's too macho.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what does that mean? I mean, I'm not quite sure. Is that now bullying, being macho? I don't know. This is a very odd definition of bullying, isn't it?
I mean, it is interesting that people... So Raab is not allowed to shout at people for not doing their job properly.
Well, he didn't shout, actually. The report said he didn't shout, he didn't lose his temper, he didn't
they said
swear.
he hadn't shouted, they didn't swear.
And he didn't throw anything.
Intimidating people, apparently. But it's... See, you made me forget what I was going to say. I interrupted.
He didn't throw anything.
The tomato that he was supposed to have thrown, what he actually did was, there was a piece of paper there, and he didn't like tomatoes in his salad, and he threw it onto a piece of paper, and that's apparently throwing it
amazing, isn't it?
At staff.
Should we just quickly talk about Camilla's grey hair?
Yes.
So the Queen Consort won't be going grey anytime soon, says her stylist. So what would you describe? Does that mean that she's blonde, Camilla? I guess she is blonde, isn't she?
Yes, she's platinum blonde, I would say. Platinum blonde. Yeah.
This is Jo Hansford, who is like a very famous stylist and has done amazing people. She does Angelina Jolie and various people. Anyway, Camilla's been going to her for years and years.
It looks like it.
And what she's saying, stop it, she's got nice hair. She's
frumpy and old-fashioned.
And what Jo Hansford is saying, grey, no one looks good with grey. All this trend for older women to let their hair go. She's saying it's not good. So I'm just wondering why yours is See, you can't decide what colour you are, can you?
My
really?
hair's going grey naturally.
No, there's nothing natural about that, Piers.
This isn't about me, this is about the Queen Consort.
Yeah, it is
Do you
about-
like her hairstyle?
Yes, I think it's a very elegant hairstyle.
Do you know what? There's nothing natural about any of our hair. None of us.
Long may that continue.
And long may that continue.
What do you think of Camilla's hairdo?
Well, you know, it's not one I'd personally choose myself, but I
No.
think it's probably befitting a queen. We don't want to be too trendy, do we, with our
Apparently
long
Charles
hair?
likes it and doesn't want... Because I used to do the royal beat, and I used to say, what about her hair? He likes it.
You didn't
He
say
doesn't
that
want us to change
you
it.
say that to Prince Charles, did you?
No, I said it to his officials.
Yes.
I have talked to Camilla, but I've never asked about her hair.
Well, apparently she's quite worried how it's going to look now with a crown on it, because that's what the Queen... Remember, the Queen had the crown, she'd have a little bit flick up at the side, and Camilla's worried that her hair's not going to look so good now, on the day.
Just think, saying the word Queen Camilla, who'd have thought 25 years ago
Yeah.
it was a possibility, even remotely,
Do you
that we
remember
would call her Queen Camilla?
Her nickname was the most hated woman of
Yeah.
women. It was like, you know, and now...
The rehabilitation has been quite tremendous.
It has been extraordinary,
But
really.
you say rehabilitation, you know, I don't think a lot of people have forgiven her. I think a lot of older people have not forgiven her.
Because of Diana, third person in my marriage.
Yes, you know, a lot of shows that I do, and if there's a phone-in about it, they ring in and they hate her. They call her the adulteress.
What do your readers think? Your column?
I don't think our readers... I think our readers... I don't know, Sam, what do you think? I think they're okay.
I think they're quite happy there's a bit of stability at that level, you know? I think she makes him happy, and I think that's, you know, they're quite happy that there's a bit of stability there. And
But it is extraordinary.
Yeah, it is. But anyway, so what are you going to do with your hair? We still didn't decide.
We're
that.
talking about
Go to
Camilla's.
Jo Hansford, she's very good.
She's probably too expensive.
Yeah, she probably is so expensive.
If she's doing the Queen's.
But we mentioned this last week, though, didn't we, Sandra? This trend for going grey.
Yeah. Yes.
I will never.
Me neither.
I will be on my deathbed and I will not be grey.
No woman in my family has gone grey, and I'm not going to be the first to break that.
No. But then there is that part of me that thinks I wish I could be as kind of bold and liberated to just let it go. I'm not.
It's interesting. She says the only people who can do this, and it's not an age thing, she said it's people who are really kind of cutting edge and they have like really short, trendy haircuts. And I was in a restaurant yesterday, and a woman who was probably my age, which is ancient, she had a head shaved at the side and it was completely white. She looked incredible. It looked really good. Yeah, it did. Yeah. It did.
Right, have we got anything else we can talk about then? Well, so what else did we chuck out, Carol Malone, that you'd like to bring back, or vice versa, that I'll bring back for you?
What? We had other stuff. We had other... I don't know.
Well, I thought, what do you think about this flipping ASLEF strike? Do you think this is...
that's the wrong thing to ask me, because I don't know.
Well, they're going on strike for 3 days next month, the train drivers, including the day of the FA Cup final.
Well, of course they are, because that's how they time it, isn't it?
Yeah.
To cause the maximum... I'm sick of strikes now.
Yeah.
I really am.
Do you think the public's turning against the strikes?
Oh, completely, yeah.
I do.
I think in the beginning they were very for them, and I think in the beginning they were certainly for the nurses, and probably still are, but I don't think they're for the junior doctors, that's for sure, because they're asking for 35% pay rise is just fantasy land. It's just completely stupid.
And the nurses are in court today. Steve Barclay's actually taking the nurses to court over their strike action this weekend, because the way they've staged it, actually, he says the second day of the strike is illegal because their mandate has run out.
That's right.
So that's going to be quite a big... I think we get the ruling tomorrow.
Which means they then have to ballot on whether strike action, and I think if they had a ballot, I think the ICM will reject it.
Yeah,
I think
agree.
the nurses are in danger of losing public support, because so many of the other nurses unions have accepted it, the midwives have accepted the pay deal.
That's today, isn't it? But I mean, I think a lot of the unions, certainly for the junior doctors, I mean, they've become really, hardcore left-wing activist unions now, and I think that's what's going to lose the public support. You know, if I was a junior doctor, and one of which spoke in our paper last week, Sam, and he just said the idea that we're living on the breadline is farcical. Yeah. He said, I have a nice flat. He said, I have a decent wage. He said, and it's only going to get bigger as I go on and get more experience. And he said, this is ridiculous. But, the activists want to make it...
And they're not junior doctors. We should be clear what they are.
Yeah.
They're junior doctors until they reach the rank of consultant or GP.
Yeah. 120 grand a year.
Absolutely. Yeah. So they're not young men and women who've just come out of medical school.
And they had a massive tax break at the budget with the pensions. So, they now... I mean, really, they've had a pretty good deal over the last few months, I think, from the government.
And should we just give a bit of credit to the midwives?
Yeah.
Yes.
Should.
Just let's applaud the midwives who have accepted the pay offer so that...
And that will put pressure on the other unions to accept it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And there's two more results due tomorrow from other health unions, and that how that goes will really sway what happens with the nurses. So,
and of course, we shouldn't forget, if you're a mum or dad, your kids are on strike. The teachers are on strike today in England.
I know. Don't get me started on that.
Right during the exam season.
Yeah. Oh no. I mean, don't get me on that. I'll be here for an hour.
we haven't got an hour, Carol. Much as we love you.
Be here in just a moment. What else can we talk about?
hang on.
What have you...
Well, we can talk about... Yeah,
let's talk about
that?
Yeah, let's talk about this, Sam.
It's your exclusive again, Sam.
Yes, well, you know, I try my best, Andrew, as you know. So, yeah, essentially one of my colleagues asked Keir Starmer this week if he would apologise to Rosie Duffield, the Labour MP, who's really suffered a lot of abuse at the hands of colleagues about her vocal position on protecting women's rights, and he just dodged the questions. He will not go there because basically he's got this group of people around him at the top of the Labour Party who are so opposed to what Rosie's saying that he just will not engage in this at all, and that is part of the problem. She says essentially there's a cabal at the top of the Labour Party that are forcing this kind of trans extremism on the Labour Party, and that's why
it's a very dangerous political position for the Leader of the Opposition because it is not where voters are.
No, it is astonishing, isn't it, that Labour, you know, are kind of so close to taking an election for the first time in years, and yet they seem to be more out of tune with the people now than they've been for years. It is astonishing. But should we talk about Prince Andrew and doing that Newsnight interview? Have we got time?
We've got 30 seconds. Go on.
Oh, he was warned not to do that disastrous Newsnight interview, and he did it anyway. A lawyer friend of his is saying that he should not have done it because it was going to be catastrophic, and the Queen knew instantly he'd made a mistake.
Because she was wise and sagacious. And one of the biggest mistakes was doing it in Buckingham Palace as well. I thought that because it almost tried dragging her into it.
And also, remember, he said that he didn't regret his association with Epstein,
he didn't.
the paedophile. I mean, it just...
He said some positives came from it, and he didn't apologise to any of the victims.
No.
And then, of course, he paid £12 million to a woman he claims he didn't meet, Virginia Giuffre.
Funny that. The fact that you're calling it Daily Express Crusade, protect women's rights, have you had much backlash, Sam, at the paper?
Actually, I think the way we've handled it, we've tried to be really sensitive about this. We're not trying to be awful to anybody. So I think, actually, we've pitched it just right, really.
Well done.
Right.
Well, great to have you two here with us.
As always, Sam Lister, Carol Malone, thank you very much. Now, Tom Harwood is in the newsroom. What's coming up, Tom?
Well, we've got a huge show from 12 until 3 today, looking at this fast-paced, changing situation in Sudan. One of the big issues is that this ceasefire is going to end today. Just how long will it hold, and can we get our Brits out of there? Can we hold on to that airstrip that we're just about gripping onto right now? Back closer to home, of course, we'll be looking into these nurses and the court case against their strike, and also, of course, at the walkouts by teachers today. But more than that, the government's announcing also a new set of restrictions on gambling today. Are those vital for the safety of Brits, or just another restriction on the way that we can spend our own money? Huge questions. And today, a global survey has revealed that the United Kingdom is one of the least racist countries in the world. We'll be exploring all of that from 12 until 3.
Not a surprise. Thank you, Tom. Very enthusiastic Tom Harwood there. We've come to the end of our show. We'll be back on Monday from 9:30. Have a great weekend from us.
See you then.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A lot of cloud out there today and things are turning soggy. The wind's also starting to pick up. It is, though, turning milder as we head towards the weekend. Big area of low pressure sitting well out to the west, but throwing these weather fronts our way and ousting this high pressure. These weather fronts bringing cloud and rain initially into the southwest. This one's already bringing rain across Scotland with quite a bit of snow on the tops of the mountains. That will continue to work slowly northwards, as will this one further south, bringing rain to Wales and a good chunk of England. But notice much of eastern England and a good part of Northern Ireland likely to stay dry. But it is quite cloudy. And it is still quite cool for the time of year, even though temperatures are picking up, not feeling very mild with the wind and the rain, which becomes more extensive through this evening. The rain eventually getting into eastern parts of England, some heavy bursts possible, spells of rain continuing up and down the land, perhaps turning a little drier across parts of southern England and central parts of Scotland through the early hours. With the cloud, though, and the breeze, it will be a mild night, certainly compared to many so far through this week. So not a particularly cold start to Friday, but a fairly drab start. Outbreaks of rain still for many, but it should turn drier from the west and then start to brighten up with some sunny spells developing on western coasts. And then through the afternoon, into parts of the south, South Wales, southern parts of England, and it's really quite warm here, 18, 19, perhaps even 20 Celsius, whereas eastern areas always stay fairly glum, even though it should be turning drier. It's going to stay fairly grey and fairly dank.